Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar at Austin Data Labs, Optimizing Your Complex Dairy Supply Chain with Data Science. We have three fantastic panelists here today, Simon Drake, Hamish Keston, and Celso Batista. Simon's our COO, based here in the US, and brings 15 years experience designing and implementing data-driven revenue management models in retail, manufacturing, and commodity agriculture. He has a degree in theoretical physics. Celso is our supply chain solutions manager in our Brazil office. He spent 10 years in the supply chain management in the food industry and has a degree in production engineering, a specialist degree in meat technology, and an MBA. Hamish is our SVP of Dairy Business Development with 17 years of dairy industry experience with Fonterra, where he was the general manager of optimization and planning. He has degrees in biotechnology, dairy science, technology, and finance. And lastly, I'm Leslie Poston. I'm the CMO at Austin Data Labs, and I'll be your host today. We encourage live note-taking and sharing on social media for our webinars. If you're on Twitter, the webinar hashtag for the day is ADLDairySC. It'll be about 30 minutes for the webinar panel with a few minutes at the end for Q&A. And I'm just going to kick things off with a question for everyone today. Could you all talk briefly about some of the unique challenges the dairy industry faces that data science can help solve to kick us off?
I'll start. I think one of the unique challenges I think that is present in the dairy industry is because of the cyclical nature of the supply. It really means it's important to plan out, 1 to 2 or even 3 years out into the future, to really make sure that your supply and your demand are balancing. And so that long-term nature of the SNOP process drives a lot of complexity into the supply chain.
To add from it, I think the functionality of the business having everything coming from a unique raw material source, but you have a huge array of possible mixed decisions to take. The product portfolio is really big with yield variations, quality requirements. You need to mix and match these to the supply capability that you have in place, as well as matching those with the customer's requirements, what the market needs. So mix and match the availability of a unique raw material with different qualities to a portfolio that has a lot of complexity to get to the finished good. It's really challenging to do by head, to do in an Excel file. So it's really can be really tricky.
Yeah, the way I described it when I was at Fonterra, it's like we would feed in, I think it was like 5.5 million rows of data into the optimization tool that we were using, and it's of a scale that you can't sit down and work that out on a spreadsheet anymore. You're dealing across sort of hundreds of markets, thousands of customers. You've got thousands of different materials that you can manufacture, and then you're looking across the commodity prices and what you can manufacture, and you're trying to make decisions around what's going to maximise the value back for your shareholders. And yeah, it's a big problem. It's an interesting problem, and it really does need good sort of data science and optimization approaches to help solve it.
Yeah. What were some of the challenges as you're running an optimization group? Getting people bought into this, because as you say, you're loading in 5 million rows. You've got a system that's making probably more decisions than any one person can even understand. How do you get people bought in and get them really driving value from this type of solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, there's a number of elements to that. So I guess sort of starting with the data, like when Fonterra sort of went on the journey of moving to a new optimization tool, it really started with cleaning up all the data and making sure that that the owners of that like key data in terms of like plant throughputs, yields, costs, and all that, really sort of sat with the person whose KPI, KPI or bonus or whatever incentives was tied to that. Like taking an example of a whole milk powder plant throughput. So it ultimately came down to the site manager to make sure that data was correct. And if it wasn't, we would either send them too much milk and they wouldn't be able to process it, or we wouldn't send them enough milk. And then they wouldn't be running as efficiently as possible. So really, like, the person that impacted most was the person that was responsible for keeping that data correct and accurate. The second key thing was bringing everyone along sort of on the journey. So and continuing to sort of keep continuing to make sure that people sort of understood how the process ran. I would spend a lot of time going out to our manufacturing sites and talking to the site teams there and explaining what it was we did and why we sort of made certain decisions, and just having really open and frank discussions with them around that was I found that to be kind of really key. And probably the third aspect of that sort of big change management process would have been it was really about demystifying what we actually did. In the past, in Fonterra, like SNOP was talked about as a black box, a control box, but nobody really knew what was going on inside it. So as we became more sort of data driven and things like that, it was really important that we actually started to sort of unravel or sort of open up that box and make it a lot more transparent around that. So people bought into the decisions and saw the value that was being created.
Yeah. I think, go ahead, Celso. I was going to say you've been very integral in helping with that.
This is a really important point Hamish is bringing up, the black box effect that the data science can bring to the business. You put a lot of complexity into one model, you get some answers out of it, and you can't find ways to explain the path that the model is taking. That's why it's really important, while even designing this type of solution, thinking of it in an end-to-end way, and every step of decision that we are triggering in the solution itself, finding proper ways to report it, so you can see how the flow of things are being considered into this really big machine that is generating random answers. Those are not random. Those are respecting this flow of things, even making prioritizations, expected mixed decisions, so you can challenge the technology itself. I think most of the value you find in those situations is when you challenge it. If you do scenario A against scenario B, I think I can beat the machine. And when you start losing against the machine, that's when the technology is being embedded into the company decisions itself. I think finding ways of reporting this, the path of thinking of the technology, the decision making of it, is huge for the success of an implementation of something end to end, something to deal with all the supply challenges.
Yeah, in some cases, that intermediate point where you say, well, why is the system making that decision to make that product versus this product, and you drill in and you start realizing, that an optimization is really thinking about stream return, not about individual product profitability. So then you say, well, let's really look at and understand the stream return. And the act of doing that is very valuable because people might have a spreadsheet separately to understand stream return on a case-by-case basis. And when you can start to unpack that logic and show it to people, just that intermediate step can be useful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, like, yeah, what I've seen that's particularly powerful with what we're able to do in the Austin Data Labs tool is actually some of the sort of dashboards and diagnostic sort of drill downs that Celso has sort of built into the model. Whereas, like, if I thought back to when I was at Fonterra, we would literally have to download all the data and just, like, the team would have to download the data into spreadsheets and then create pivots and do lookups and see what had happened between different scenarios, kind of thing. Whereas now, like, literally you can just go and click down on a dashboard and drop down to different levels and go and look at what site A is doing in terms of making one particular product mix and how that's interacting and impacting on a different site, kind of thing, in a really sort of simple, intuitive way of filling down. So, I guess that leads into a question that I'd ask in terms of like, maybe if the two of you could talk about how we've been able to, like, take out a lot of spreadsheets and models, etc., that sort of sat in and around that planning space, and how we've enabled that, because that's a really key area that I see.
Well, it's interesting because to begin with, as we were thinking about this, it wasn't necessarily a goal, but when you think about what an optimization of this nature requires, you really need to have a good view of what's your expected milk supply, potentially down, farm or a milk collection region. And you need to have a good understanding of plant capabilities, forecasted demand, a lot of these different elements. It really stretches the entire supply chain. And many companies we work with, we find they're managing this in Excel. They've got they get a very complicated, very good Excel models, which are helping them understand the stream return or forecasted milk supply. But the very nature of it sitting in an Excel spreadsheet, it doesn't really lead to that, to drive the full level of collaboration, because it's difficult to know, am I making a plan off the most recent version? So we've really built the capability to relatively easily replace those spreadsheets by kind of doing a one-time upload of the information, configuring the functionality, so that then we can say to whoever's owning that, to your point, it's critical the people who are nearest and most affected by it now maintain that, and they maintain it in the system, which then gives you a good way of tracking that, and then also having everyone in every other function always operating off the most recent and most accurate set of information. So we didn't necessarily set out to replace a lot of these Excel spreadsheets, but it's almost required in the approach to a holistic supply chain solution.
And it's different techniques, right, Simon? If you get the main spreadsheets, you are talking about yield interpretation, bill of material, how to deal with different bill of materials, time varying ones depending on the case. So this is one part of the issue. Then you want to bring some data science to it, putting statistics for demand forecasting. You put operational research to represent, to model the supply chain as a whole, so you can trigger some maximization, triggering the best margin I can get of a given scenario. You start running away from the common build a plan, see how much you can match of the demand you receive it, how much you can fill your lines, use the raw milk that is in your direction. So mix and matching those things all together to deliver the best margin possible, the best financial result possible, you need to mix and match techniques. It's not one bullet to achieve this goal. So I think that's where the data science comes to our favor. So we can, for each part of the decision that we are expecting to trigger, we can mold in the way that we are expecting for scenarios comparison. So we can challenge the possibilities to the biggest level possible.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, when you think about, I mean, we'll talk about a supply chain optimization as though it's one thing, but behind the scenes, it is important. You're right. There's multiple data science or AI elements going into it. So there may be some artificial intelligence going on in the forecasting. You've got one optimization technique for that 3-year mass balance and valuation of milk. And then you might have a very different technique where you're talking about scheduling the next 6 weeks on a daily level, where you've got now line constraints, sequencing orders. And so you're right. There's not one magical solution to all of those elements. And I mean, the nice thing is, as a customer, you can think of, we have an optimization, but behind the scenes, in order to really make that work, there's a lot of different techniques being used.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Simon, you kind of mentioned about like the different horizons, so like in terms of scheduling versus the strategic horizons. I guess a challenge that I experienced at Fonterra was we did a monthly plan, but then how that actually was broken down into essentially into a weekly and then daily production schedule. There wasn't a direct link between those two, and so we had tools that did the monthly sort of revenue optimization, but then when it came down to the production schedule, it was a lot more manual. But so, like in our approach that we take at Austin Data Labs, could you talk to how we stitch those different time horizons together, and so the schedule to the strategic horizon?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a challenge there, and it makes sense because the types of constraints and concerns you have when you're thinking about optimization, as you said, there's multiple ways of looking at it. You have very different things you're worrying about when you're thinking, what am I going to be making over the next week versus making sure you've got a mass balance right for 6 months from now or a year from now. And so essentially what we do is we can have time varying buckets of information. So we can be looking at a very granular level by day, and potentially you can think about doing it by day for the first month or the first 2 months. So you're actually applying different constraints. So the actual optimization model that is running over that time frame could be a very different structure than the one that is then running for the overall length of time. And the reason why you have to do that is probably intuitive to people, that if you imagine trying to do 3 years at a daily level, worrying about change over time, you're going to have a system that it might take a week to run. So what you do is you figure out, based on the decisions you're making in each time frame, what level of constraint and what level of aggregation do you need, and then we can essentially stitch those together, so that the first month daily becomes the answer for the first month of now your longer term plan, and they all work together. And we do see that that's critical, because you can imagine that the manual work that goes around otherwise, if you don't set off in the correct direction for the first week and you have a long-term plan, then it's going to be hard, because you're always doing the first week. No matter what you do, you're always making those first steps. And so where you have decisions, you want to make sure you're pointing in that direction that the whole executive team has agreed to.
Yeah, no, it's the power of asking the proper question, right? Because the long term, you Sometimes people just want a specific company wants a new technology, but it's really huge to ask the proper questions. For a long-term decision, you are taking really high-level supply decisions. You are selecting partnerships you want to stick with your customer base. So it's a specific array of questions you are trying to address. In the shorter term is execution, is tactical to execution. So the shipments I'll need to program for next week, making sure that my sites have the production plan in place. They are able to match it with all the constraints and the complexities that they will need to deal in the given week. So asking different questions to address different issues. I think it's sometimes we lose track of it. We just need the solution to address it. But it's important to set this up with proper questions.
Yeah,
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
I've worked at other data science companies, and one of the things that sets Austin Data Labs apart, in my opinion, is our deep bench of industry experts, combined with our smart data scientists. Can you talk a bit about the impact that has on time to value for dairy customers and implementation, how that helps implementation to have that combination of skills?
You need both sets of people because of the complexity of these solutions, having a heuristic or a rough approach doesn't really get you there. So I think it makes sense. We talked about why you need data science, but the trouble with focusing from a data science point of view, if you look at a dairy company as an outsider, someone who doesn't have 10, 20 years running a dairy company and knowing how it works, there could be 10 interesting problems there. And you might think, oh, I can apply data science to any one of these issues. Someone who's been in the industry will be able to tell you, look, don't even bother going after that one because things are going to change so rapidly that you've got silos of milk that are sitting there already. You've got decisions that have been made. Don't try and optimize that because that gets down to a very tactical thing. A plant manager's handling that. You leave that one. Here's something over here. There's a lot of value in this. So it really helps that the industry expert helps to guide the data scientist. And I think the data scientist is guiding the industry expert to say, okay, let's keep this in a realm of what's mathematically possible. So I think that combination naturally drives to value more rapidly.
Yeah, I agree. And what I'd sort of also say is like, if I think about sort of one of our recent implementations where I did some consulting work on business structures and processes, etc., business rules, and that sort of side of things, and that helped sort of support the changes that that the company wanted to move in, and that as we implemented the systems that we needed to bring the people along on the journey, I think having somebody that's got that industry experience, then it gives you the credibility to sort of drive some of those decisions and sort of help implement them. And then I think on the other side, like with the data science side, it's like Simon said, it's about sort of keeping the problem or sort of boiling the problem down to sort of something that we can realistically solve, and that captures the most value that we're able to.
I think just to add a bit from past experiences, when we start a big data project, we do an assessment, we do a discovery phase, we try to play with data a little bit. And when we set the first schema, we put everything into one place and we report it. Sometimes it has huge value for the company because it's so spread out. Having everything together so you can mix and match the flow of things. By itself, you can bring a lot of value. So you didn't bring up any of the fancy guns. You are only delivering putting things in order. You get huge value of it. So sometimes the companies with its departments lose track of the continuity of things. So we faced it not once. We face it a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good point to make.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Fantastic. One of the other things I hear you say a lot is talking about the unique challenges of the disassembly supply chain, which is, I think, a unique way to talk about supply chains. Can you just explore that idea a little bit for everyone, what that means and what we do with it here?
Yeah, I'll go first on that. So I mean, if you think about sort of most manufacturing processes, you essentially you buy widgets and then you put them together and you get an airplane or you get a car. So you're assembling something, and you buy the components or the ingredients, and you put them together in certain ratios, etc., or bolt them together, and you get a product out of the end of it. But the easiest way to think about like the disassembly business is you get a cow that comes in, right? And it can be a skinny cow, it can be a fat cow, it can be an organic cow, it can be who knows what, grass fed, etc. And so to start with, you've got a lot of variability. So cows aren't like widgets; they're all different. But then the next obvious thing is, well, what's the first, you end up, there's different cuts of beef. And so immediately you're cutting the beast up, you're butchering the beast, and so you're breaking it down into component parts. And as you make the first decision in terms of what primary cut you're going to do, that then influences every single other decision that you make subsequent to that. And that's where a lot of the complexity comes in. And so in dairy, it's kind of less obvious, but if you want butter, you also end up with skim milk. If you want to make cheese, you end up with whey. And so there's all these components where you're essentially kind of breaking the milk down and into different sort of byproducts. And and that's kind of where it gets really complex. You've got seasonal variation in terms of composition. You've got lactation cycles in terms of the cows and what nutrition they require for their calves at different phases, and that adds a lot of complexity. And then if I think about a simple product like whole milk powder, bog standard whole milk powder, there might be 4 different ways, or there is 4 different ways that we can standardize that to make essentially the identical product at the end. Whereas if you think about, if you look at traditional ERP systems, there's one way to make a finished good or a finished product. Whereas we've got multiple ways to make the same product from different combinations of byproducts and primary products and things like that. And that adds a lot of complexity.
Yeah. And just to add one more complexity to that is if you're looking at making a certain amount of cheese, in January, the amount of milk that you need to make it could be different than in June, because you have whole milk coming in. It has different compositions. It needs to, depending on the component ratios of the milk, it needs to go through different amounts of processing depending on the time of year and depending on the type of milk. So you really, we'll say it's time varying bills of materials, but you've got a bill of material that is dependent on the input product. So that then multiplies out the complexity and number of different options you have by 100-fold.
Yeah, and like a really simple way that I'd illustrate that is that, so at Fonterra I had about 1,500 SKUs, So like different products that we'd manufacture. But then when you looked at across all our sites, across the months, so as the yields and the compositions varied, that blew out to like 300,000 liquid yield bombs from 1,500 materials kind of thing. And so like, yeah.
Celso, do you have anything from the data science world?
Just to put this, take all this complexity, put in a string value shape, do an optimization around it, do a proper ranking report, piece of cake.
Yeah.
So easy.
Yes.
We are actually coming up at the 30-minute mark, so I want to close out with a final question for you guys, and then a couple of questions that we've gotten from the audience. So just to close out the panel portion, can each of you leave our audience with a handful of things they can do right now to get their data, their existing data, ready to work with a company like ours, or if they're already working with a company like ours, something they can do to improve their data?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, one of the things that we've really noticed, working across the gamut of dairy, meat, every other sort of company, people's data is never quite ready. And one of the things we've noticed is having the ability to have a system maybe outside the ERP, which is going to manage some of these complexities in the data, it becomes very important. And so one of the things we've done is really try to walk alongside customers to help them get their data ready. So I would say if you're thinking about a project or thinking about how do I get ready for an optimization, I think one of the critical things to do is have a third party really look at this, who understands what the end state goal of the optimization is, so they can start to come up with a plan. Because we've seen projects just getting data ready be as costly and time consuming as the actual overall optimization project. So I think doing that in isolation, you can really churn your wheels.
I would go back to something we mentioned before getting your data ready, focusing in the pain points, the questions you want to address. I think this is huge as a first step. What is the focus? Which parts of the problems or which full problems we are expecting to address?
Yeah.
Finding data to make it available. We have multiple ways of doing it. So we have expertise. We can find expertise in the business itself more than anywhere. So it's more of a matter than of getting the proper goals of a data science application.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me was right from senior leadership down is really emphasizing the importance of good data, and that decisions were being based on data and facts, because keeping master data up to date is not the most exciting job in the world. I found it quite boring, but it was important because if you didn't have your master data right, then everything you're basing your decisions off ends up it just multiplies out, and you just get errors, and your model drifts away, and then it won't end up being used. So yeah, just having that laser-like focus that data actually really is important. It's driving the decisions. It's important to keep it accurate. And you need to get your senior leadership saying that and showing that in their behaviours.
Fantastic. One of the questions we have from listeners right now is the discrepancy between short-term execution needs and long-term vision. and how data science can help with that. So it's, if I'm understanding their question correctly, it's what the planners need versus what the C-suite needs, and how do we make those two needs come together?
Yeah, I mean, that, in part, that's a little bit of what we were talking about when we were talking about the shorter term planning versus long term and how you stitch those together. There's kind of the technical aspect of that, but I think there's a very interesting element here, which is a lot of the maybe high value decisions are these longer term strategic things where you really get to guide where the ship is going. But that process of pulling the information together for a long-term S&OP can be very painful. And one of the things we've realized is if you can get the people who are doing the short-term execution bought in and using a system to free up some of their time, and also they get to understand that the types of constraints and understanding built into a model really do let you execute in the near term, it kind of is part of that process of, I think, getting people bought in, where people can see, okay, you're scheduling my plant for tomorrow. Okay, I'm more likely to believe that you can give me a balance of how the milk will be used next year. Whereas it becomes very challenging if you can't give recommendations that are actually executable near term. How is the thing that's in the long term executable? So I think part of the reason for doing that is to build that confidence and buy-in across the company. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think Hamish has some experience in the change management that is required to make this happen. I think you can share this with us in the last couple of minutes, Hamish.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a key part around that was the actual keeping a management system. So whether that was like S&OP or IBP or but how you're running the business and where you're driving the decisions from, that needed to be linked in to the technology changes, the system changes, etc. That you're making. And like Simon said, it's like if you can't get things right in the next sort of couple of months, how do you build that sort of credibility further out with your exec team? But then the converse of that, because what you want your senior leadership team to focus on is that longer term strategic stuff, and have the trust that we'll deal with the issues in the short term kind of thing. Because if that trust isn't there, and it took us probably a sort of good 18 months to 2 years, that they'll just keep diving in and trying to solve those tactical issues, which then takes them away from looking at that longer term strategic horizon. So yeah, that was a big challenge. But yeah, there's a lot of value there if you can get the focus happening in the right areas.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. We are going to close out at this point. We are at the near 40-minute mark. So I want to thank everyone for coming and for listening to our webinar. I hope that you've enjoyed representation from our global company, from our New Zealand office, our Brazil office, and our office in the United States. If you want to know more about us, please go to our website, ask for a demo, or email any of the presenters. Our emails are on the landing page here and will be on the website. The recording will be up shortly if you'd like to replay this for more information. Thank you for coming.
All right. Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.